Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Juan Soto. I'm a Microsoft Access MVP. I also head up my own firm, IT Impact, which you can find at AccessExperts.com. We are starting a new season. We usually take the summer off. May is our last month, and then we take June, July, and August off. We're excited to come back. We usually don't start with SQL Server Academy Part 1, but since we didn't do it last year, I decided to start this year. There's a lot of information that we'll be sharing, so we usually stretch this over 3 months. Part 1 you're getting today, Part 2 is next month in October, and Part 3 we finalize in November. Hopefully you can make it for all 3 of them. About me, you can reach me here. This is my contact info. You can reach me at LinkedIn, as well as join the group. We have an Access with SQL Server group that's got more than 1,000 members in it, and you've probably heard about the meeting there. And always willing to talk. We also have a blog at AccessUserGroups.org blog. And the start here is a great place to start if you're starting your journey with SQL Server. Alright, so you want to use SQL Server, which I commend you, right? Because Access, it's great for 1 or 2 people. When a company calls out here, IT Impact, and they say, I want to improve the speed of Microsoft Access, or they ask me to design a new product, a new database from scratch, I'll ask them how many people are going to be using this system. And if they tell me 2 or 3 people, we might be able to get away with it with using an Access backend. But more than 2 or 3 people, I immediately recommend that they use SQL Server for several reasons, not just because of the speed, but also the security of the data. As you probably are aware, it's ridiculously easy to walk out with the data from Microsoft Access database. You pretty much insert a USB drive into the computer, or you can email the files outside of the company to somebody else. It's a lot harder to do that using SQL Server as your backend. So if you're dealing with confidential information such as HIPAA or credit card information, I immediately tell them we're going to use SQL Server, right? Sometimes they'll call us and they'll say, hey, the database is slow, it's crashing all the time. And so we go through this process with them, make sure that they're following best practices. A lot of times it's not necessary to upgrade the SQL Server. It's maybe because the person who originally designed the database was not a Microsoft Access expert. So for example, they didn't split it in the front end and back end, where the back end is on the network and the front end is working on the local computer. Maybe they are not updating the product, right? They turned off updates because there was one problem. One time they had a problem with updates, decided to turn off updates, and consequently there was a Windows update and that affected their database, right? And so we go through this triage where we check to see that if they are following these best practices, and if they are still having issues after that, then we consider upgrading them. Another issue why you want to upgrade SQL Server is the limitation of the file size and Access. If you're not aware of this, Access has a 2 GB limit. Now, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've only had a few. I can count with both hands how many times somebody's reached the 2 GB limit, because mostly you're dealing with small businesses that have hundreds of transactions per month, not thousands of transactions per month or thousands of transactions per day, right? It really is, these are really small businesses that are leveraging Access. So another issue is Microsoft Access was never designed for VPN. And consequently, we'll get calls, we'll say, hey, we want to use this over VPN. Every time we use it, it's just really slow. I'm like, yeah, because Access was never designed to work with VPN. It was designed to work on a local network. I want to be able to say that Access was created before the internet, as you may or may not be aware of, when I had hair on my head. And so it was never designed for the internet. During this course, we're going to show you how to optimize Access for internet, by the way, with Azure. But it was never designed for that. So they'll call us up saying that as well. So to resume, to be clear, the reasons why you want to upgrade to Access SQL Server is for security, speed, reliability, working over VPN, handling many more users, and having a much more pleasant experience with SQL Server and Access. There's some common misconceptions. I can't tell you how many times developers are disappointed with the performance of SQL Server with Access. They call me up and say, Juan, I upgraded the backend to SQL Server and it's just really slow. Yeah, I can imagine why it's slow. There's some reasons why it's slow. You need to learn how to optimize Access with SQL Server, which you'll be learning in this academy. I once remember interviewing a developer. Gosh, I wonder if he's still around. I'm not going to say his name, but he's an older gentleman. Interviewing him for a senior access consultant in my firm. And I asked him, hey, do you use Access with SQL Server? And he said, oh yeah, all the time. Oh really? Okay. Tell me about T-SQL. Oh, I don't use T-SQL. Oh, you don't use T-SQL? Okay. Well, T-SQL, which you don't know, is the language that SQL Server speaks, right? In terms of queries and programming. All right, so you don't know T-SQL. How about views? Can we talk about views? Oh, I don't use views. All right, and okay, how about stored procedures? Oh, I don't use those either. But basically, all he was using SQL Server was to link the tables back to Access. And to this day, I still have clients who call me up that use SQL Server as their backend, and they're complaining about the speed. And it's not unusual to have that situation where you've got somebody who thinks, oh, I'll just upgrade the data to SQL Server and just link those tables back to this front end. I'm all set. Everything's work hunky-dory. No, it's not. You need to do more than that. And I always preface these discussions. You know, I'm not a SQL Server expert. I'm an expert on Access with SQL Server, right? That's my specialty, how to optimize Access with SQL Server, how to optimize Access with Azure. I would imagine that my skill set with Azure would translate to also Amazon Web Services using their SQL Server service. And if anybody, I don't use Amazon Web Services. There's a particular name that they have for SQL Server and Amazon. If you know that name, please share it in the comments. So you're probably wondering, okay, what version of SQL Server should I pick for my project? This is a great question. And that is, pick one, right? Pick the one you have. So when I interview clients who call me up, I say, okay, what version of SQL Server you have? Oh, we have so-and-so. I'm like, okay, what do you use? I'm not picky. Why I'm not picky? Because when you upgrade the Access database to SQL Server, the analogy is you're getting from point A to point B with a bicycle using Access, and now you're going to be using a car. Even the free version of SQL Server Express runs circles around the Access jet engine. It's just Access was never designed for multiple people, a lot of data, right? And that's what you leverage with SQL Server. SQL Server was designed from the ground up to be a lot more efficient. Even the storage of SQL Server. For example, we were doing a project for a customer that had a very large Access database, around 500 megabytes and gigabytes, excuse me. No, 500 megabytes. Because there's a 2 gigabyte limit, right? So it can't be 500 gigabytes. So 500 megabytes. And I was curious how much space that same data would occupy with SQL Server. So I go into SQL Server properties of the database, look at the file size. It went from 500 megabytes in Access to 120 megabytes in SQL Server. So it's not only is SQL Server running circles around the Access database, it's also storing the data much more efficiently. And so thanks, Mark, for the comments. If you're not in the comments, Mark posted Mark Edwards, who's a senior access consultant at IT Impact, joined us. Thank you for joining us, Mark. He's stealing some of my thunders there.
I'm sorry about that. I was just going along with the slides. Don't know what you're getting to later.
Don't worry. So if you guys got any questions, Mark can answer them. We have several experts tonight: Wendy, Mark, George Hepworth, who can answer any questions. So if you got any questions, I'm trying to monitor the chat, the participants, right? Make sure I met everybody. We're up to 11 people. Thank you very much, everybody, for showing up. So yeah, look, if the client, now there are some extreme cases where we walk into a situation with a customer and they're using an outdated version of SQL Server that's out of support. The other day, I had a client who's using SQL Server 2009, out of support, right? So we told him, look, you gotta upgrade to a more recent version. So in general, if the product still has support, doesn't matter how old it is, what version it is, it'll work. Now, I want to make a comment regarding SQL Server Express. This is a free version of SQL Server, and it has its limitations. But, you know, when you're coming from Access SQL Server Express is more than enough power for most businesses. I can count on two hands clients who had to upgrade. A typical situation I had once where customer had 100 users right away. That's got to be SQL Server Enterprise or Standard Edition. But if you got 25 people and the database size is fairly small and you're happy with the performance, then stay with SQL Server Express. There's no need to spend the money on SQL Server Standard. Using the latest drivers is critical. OLADB driver 17 or 18 is the latest version, and OLADB driver 18. That's a misspelling, by the way. It says OD, so it should be OLADB. Sorry about that. Let me fix that right now. And so these drivers you can find them directly on the Microsoft website, and you download them from there. All right. So we're going to talk about the limitations of Express. Microsoft's not dumb. They give you Express for free, but it's like you're working with SQL Server with hand tied behind its back. They want you to buy the SQL Server Standard Edition. More recently, even more so, they want you to upgrade to Azure. Right? They want your data in the cloud. They desperately want your data in the cloud. They don't even care about selling SQL Server licenses. They rather you buy the cloud versions, pay them a monthly fee forever, than buy the product SQL Server, pay a one-time fee, right? It has this limitation, 11 gigabytes of hard drive space. And so, by the way, I've never seen a customer exceed 11 gigabytes of hard drive space for their database in SQL Server Express. Again, because we're coming from Access, right? We're not talking about high transaction. We're not talking about highly transaction. We're not talking about Amazon here, right? Amazon does not run Access, obviously, but you know, it's not that you have a transaction every second with these databases that they're upgrading. It only uses 1 gig of RAM. So if that server, most servers these days have, you know, a lot of RAM, 128 gigs of RAM, 256 gigs of RAM. Express only uses 1 gig, and it only uses one socket of the 4 cores. So you can have a 20 core SQL Server, and it only uses one socket. It's a lot of limitations. And so what I tell clients is, look, let's try SQL Server Express, and if that doesn't work, then we will upgrade to Standard Edition, right? We'll have you upgrade to Standard Edition. And you know, almost always SQL Server Express runs fine, to the point where you can actually run Express on the machine. I've had clients who don't have a server. I says, okay, if you don't have a server, just go to Best Buy, get yourself a fairly decent workstation, and we'll put it in the corner there. Nobody uses it, and that'll be your server for SQL Server Express, right? Not a problem. This is my number one tip. When you start this process of upgrading Access SQL Server, you gotta fix the problems you're having in Access first. I'm talking about missing indexes, slow performance. If it's slow already in Access, when it's a local file, It's going to be a lot slower in SQL Server, right? Don't expect SQL Server to be this panacea of solving your issues with access, your performance issues. You don't expect it to solve a poorly designed database, right? If you have design issues, tables without indexes, no relational integrity involved, using field names that are banned in SQL Server, like the word date or field. There are some words that you cannot have as field names. Using the attachment type in Access, there's a data type in Access called attachment, or multi-value. There's a field type called multi-value. Those are not compatible. They will not upgrade to SQL Server. So you gotta do your homework and fix the issues you're having now with Access, right? It should come along, right? Before you go down this path, because if you don't do this, you're making it worse in the long run. Oh boy, I've had people call me up, hey, we like to use SharePoint to store the data. And George Hepworth wrote the only book in existence in Georgia. If you can find the link to your book in Amazon, post it here. The only book in existence on how to use Access with SharePoint. It's an oldie but a goodie. And even George, he co-wrote it with Ben Clothier, who was one of my employees. Even George would tell you that SharePoint probably not the ideal medium to store your database, right? And so I still get people call me up, says, hey, we want to use SharePoint list. Like, okay, you can. I tell them, all right, you okay? You can use it. I'm not saying you can't, but I don't recommend it for a full wide range of issues I'm not going to get into here. Just don't even think about using it. All right. So something that you're going to hear a lot during the academy is DSN-less, where DSN stands for, data shared name. I can't remember what the SNN stand for. Somebody knows what the DSN letter stand for, that'd be great. Mr. Hujiro has some comment here. I had to do that for a client engagement. We needed the power of Access, but SharePoint was the only option. Oh boy. Client wouldn't go get SQL Server. Oh boy. I would like interested to know how that project ended, Mr. Hujiro. So you're gonna see a lot about DSN-less, right? DSN-less connections. Now DSN, which I can't recall what DSN stands for right now, but it means that if you have, for example, 25 users using your database, you would have to create 25 DSNs by going into Control Panel. Okay, thanks, Jan. Data server name. Thank you very much. You have to go into that workstation, the Control Panel, Data Sources, and configure the DSN. You could automate that, by the way, if you have an admin. A network admin is pretty savvy with PowerShell and login scripts, but for the most part, we will not be using data source name. Okay, thank you, Jan. That makes more sense. We don't recommend you create DSN. I'm not saying you don't have to, and it's fine. If you want to use DSN, it's fine. It's more of an administrative hassle having to create the DSN. Sometimes you have to create multiple DSNs for a project because you have multiple servers involved or multiple databases involved, and you'd rather not do that. You can just go DSN-less, and we're going to show you that here next month. All right, so this is important because the key to optimizing Access SQL Server is leveraging ADODB. Active Data Objects is what ADO stands for. Now, this is the same technology you would use whether it's SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL. You're using ADODB, so the concepts that you're learning during this academy will apply to all those data sources. And we're going to get real into the nitty-gritty how to leverage ADODB during this academy. But DAO is what Access uses natively, the jet engine, right? Data access objects. So if you haven't, or if you've done this before where you've created a link to a SQL Server table in your database, and then you created a query, not a pass-through query, but a regular query, you're using DAO. For the linking of the table, you're always using DAO technology. For creating queries, you're always using DAO technology. When you use ADODB, you're using the old ADB driver we mentioned earlier. And the pass-through query is a good example, where the name says that the pass-through query means it bypasses the jet engine and goes straight to the server. And in your code, we're going to be using some code examples in November, where you'll be able to see in November how we can leverage ADODB in your code to go send commands directly to SQL Server. There are several instances where you want to do that. Why would you want to send commands to SQL Server directly from your Access database? Well, I'll give you a great instance. Say, for example, you have a client that's got 150,000 records regarding products, right? Let's just assume he has a product table with 150,000 records in his product table. And he wants all these prices to update by 5%. If you run that query in Access, an update query, to increase the price by 5% on every product in that table, it's going to take a while. We call those coffee breaks for a reason. You go get your coffee, you go talk to your coworker at the cubicle next to yours, and maybe if it doesn't time out first, by the time you get back, it'll be done. Versus using the ADODB or a pass-through query, it gets done almost immediately. But that's a good example. The action queries are definitely a no-no running from Access with a regular query. Instead, you want to use action query, and you want to run those queries in a pass-through query, or even better yet, in your code. And we'll do that. George says his book is no longer available, but if you are interested, if you still do work with SharePoint and Access, I do recommend you pick up the book in a used store somewhere. And thank you, George, for checking out that. All right, so DAO and ADODB, we're going to talk about how to optimize that relationship, when to use when, right? When am I using ADODB? When am I using DAO? So we're going to be talking about all of that. So the Access front end, right, is using DAO or ADO. DAO is using the old DBC driver. ADO is using the old ADB driver. So think of it that way. So you got two technologies, data access technologies, and one of them is DAO, the other one is ADODB. Thank you, Jan, for your comment regarding the coffee. Yeah, that's my experience too. It's a lot faster. That's great. Look, what I'm going to show you during this academy is not rocket science. You're pretty much going to become a SQL Server developer. So if you stick around for October and November, you will learn more about how to be a SQL Server developer, because you have to. You got to learn how to become a SQL Server developer in order to leverage this wonderful technology with Access. I'm constantly getting projects. We are one of the largest Access consulting firms in the nation, and we're the only Microsoft partner who specializes in Access. We're getting work left and right in this area, and you really need to up your game. Let me know. Raise your hand if you're a consultant. If you have your own practice, I'd like to know how many people have their own practice here. But if you have your own practice, there's a ton of work on this. And it was funny because I had an employee once tell me, Juan, why are you giving the keys to the kingdom? Why are you telling everybody our secrets? I said, well, two things. Number one, we need more people to learn this stuff, not less. There's so much, and there's a lot of work involved that's available out there than where we have capacity to do for. And number two, you can take my academy, you can watch videos all you want, but if you really want to become a master in this, you really need to actually get down to it. I have a client who hired me, and she hired me to help her learn how to do optimize Access with SQL Server. And to this day, she's still using this stuff. I'm not going to mention her name, but it was real eye-opener for her, and all it takes is one project. To learn this stuff I'm showing you here, one project, and after one project, you're going to master this. All right, Jan, welcome back. All right, so we're going to talk about AZIDLDB, where you're going to leverage this framework that we developed. It's available on the website. It's a framework I created. All right, and so SQL Server Migration Assistant is what we're going to be using next month to upsize access to SQL Server. Is it the only tool? No. There are other tools that you can do. This is the one I use. Even within my firm, there are some people who prefer other tools. I like to stick with the Microsoft technology. It's funny because as an Access MVP, I get invited to the mothership once a year in March, where we go out there. We have to fly our own way. They don't pay for our flights or our hotel, but once we get there, they'll give us food, entertain us, and I get to meet with the Access team in Redmond, Washington. And there was one year where they invited the team that does SQL Server Migration Assistant to give us a chat. I wonder if George was there. George was. You may have been. You remember when you were still an MVP? You might have been there for that session. And it was funny because he's like, "Oh, they have migration systems for all the technologies. They have one for Oracle to SQL Server, MySQL to SQL Server." Hey, well, George, were you in that session, by the way?
I think so. Yeah, I was in one. It might have been,
Yeah. So the program manager for SQL Server Migration Assistant was up there.
Yeah.
And he lists all the different migration systems they have, right? They have Excel to SQL Server, Oracle to SQL Server, right? And he lists all that. And then we pointed out, it says, well, you don't have Access up there. You're talking to the Access MVPs, and you don't have Access on your slide.
Yes, I was there for that one.
Yeah. And he's like, oh man, I'm so sorry. Turns out the Access is the #1 use of SQL Server Migration Assistant. More people use Access SQL Server Migration Assistant than any other migration assistant. So we do get stats sometime, right? Every time we do a MVP summit, they give us stats. One of the stats that we always hear when we go is Access continues to be the #1 database in the world. There are more Access databases than any other database technology on the planet. Millions upon millions of databases. There are more Excel spreadsheets than database, right? And there are more Word docs than Excel spreadsheets. But when it comes to database technology, and that's why I laugh when people call me up and they say, "Juan, I heard Access is going away." Dude, are you serious? I keep telling myself, are we still having this conversation in this day and age, right? But I heard Access is going away, and VB, Visual Basic Application, is going away, and you hear these persistent rumors all the time. I should probably put that on my TikTok channel videos on that. And so, I had to educate them. I'm not going to laugh in their face like I did now. I said, okay, sir, well, let me tell you why it's not going away, right? And I give them the reasons for that. And, it's the largest database, the most used database technology on the planet. VBA is not used just in Access, but also used in Excel, Word, PowerPoint, Outlook. If Microsoft were to take VBA away, the uproar from the Excel community, forget about Access, the Excel community. Can you imagine if they flip the switch and they say, okay, well, starting in the 2026, VBA is going away. There's no more VBA. The uproar from all these chief financial officers that love Excel and have all these macros and all this automation would be deafening, right? They're not dumb. They wouldn't do that. But because VBA is shared with all these other products, they have it. Now, are they improving VBA? No. I'll be the first one to tell you. We've been getting this IDE that we'll be working with. It's been the same for I don't know how many years. I can't even remember the last time they upgraded the IDE. It's just not their focus. But it's not going away. Now, when you use SSMA, right? Usually, here's the sequence of events. Client hires me. They sign the proposal, give me a deposit. Those are the two things I always ask, by the way, before I book the revenue in my QuickBooks. Did you sign my proposal? Did you give me a deposit? Once I have those two things, you're a client, right? So then I grab their Access database file and I use SQL Server Migration Assistant to create the database in SQL Server. And we'll see that next month. Then I work on it, and 6 to 8 weeks later, I have an alpha version that I want to show them. Well, when I show them the alpha version, they don't want to see data from 6 weeks ago, right? Ideally, you want to show them data from most recent possible. So just before the Access version, alpha version, I'll ask them for their latest backend file and Access updated with SQL Server. It's so ridiculously easy to update the SQL Server with the latest Access data. You'll be seeing that. And then I show them, right, the alpha version, get their feedback, go away, and then 2 weeks later I come back with a beta version, and again I update the database in SQL Server. And then finally, when we do the rollout, I do one last migration. So having the SQL Server Migration Assistant help you throughout that whole process is going to be a huge boon in productivity. First of all, you're going to impress your client tremendously by having the latest data in your SQL Server. And two, it's going to save you countless hours where you don't have to be grappling with that. And this is one of the reasons why I tell you to fix the problems with Access first, the indexes, rename the fields, right? Because if you don't do that, the SQL Server Migration System will fail for those tables. And then you got to go back and change the data, right? And so what I always tell the client is, look, you're using fields that are not compatible with SQL Server. We need to address that first. Roll out a new version of the Access front end. Get rid of those features, because you're not going to have them in SQL Server. They're like, okay, well, we use that now. I'm like, well, you can't use them with the SQL Server, right? Those fields are not compatible. So best practice is modify the Access system first. Get rid of the attachment fields. Get rid of the multi-value fields. Then you can use SQL Server Migration Assistant, one click, update the data. If you don't do that, every time you want to update the data, it's a pain in the butt, because you got to strip out those fields, extract the attachments. I mean, it's just not worth it, really. All right, this is some of the issues we talked about, right? In terms of correcting things you have to correct with Access, right, before you migrate to SQL Server. Complex primary keys. Let's talk about a little about that. Let's have this little conversation. Here's the thing about complex primary keys. You shouldn't have any. Do not use complex primary keys, right? I mean, the other day I'm looking at this database file customer gave me, and it's like a primary key that has several numbers followed by several digits, several text, right, characters, and then ends with. And I asked him, what the hell is this? What are you doing here with this part? Because you can't automate it. Every time you add an order to the system, you got to put it in manually or have code that figures it out. Oh, it's great because I look at it and I can tell the day the order was created, who the customer was, and what kind of order is it. I'm like, okay, I get it now. I understand why you did that, but that's not best practice. All right. So how do we handle that situation? Well, number one, sometimes they won't let you to get rid of it. They're like, no, I want to see that primary key one. I'm like, okay, fine. And so what I'll do is I'll add another primary key, right? It stops being the primary key. I add another one to the database that's really just a numbers only outer increment field. And then I show them theirs on the screen in Access. So they're happy because they continue to see that, right? And they can look at the order at a glance. And I'm happy because the primary key is not a complex primary key. It's just a simple outer increment field, right? And trust me when I say this, it impacts your performance quite a lot when you have these complex primary keys with multiple fields and all kinds of gibberish in there. Stay away from that stuff. Here's something that I to this day, I'm amazed what this customer did. It's not has nothing to do with primary keys, but I'm gonna show it to you anyway. I'm gonna tell you anyway. He's got this furniture store, and he's got everything tagged with the price in the furniture store. And it's a mom and pop furniture store, so he helps, God bless him, he helps a lot of Hispanic families, minority families, Arab families afford furniture, so he puts them on a payment plan. And so he will negotiate with them, right? They'll come in, they see a sofa. Sofa is listed at $1,200, and being Hispanics, if you're come from a Hispanic background, you know how we are. We like to have, hey, can I have it for $900? I can have it for $1,000. And he tells me he uses a little trick with the price tag. On the price tag, he sees it says that whatever the price is, the customer sees $1,000, and then below that there's a series of numbers. And he tells me, you see those numbers in the tag? Yeah. It's the first four of those are gibberish. After the first four is the real price I paid for that item, right? So, for example, the price tag might say 2025 $799. So he knows that $799 was his cost. The customer is asking it for $999 or $899. He knows what his limit is in terms of the price. So I thought that was pretty ingenious, because before he did that and he wanted to negotiate with the customer, he had to go running back to the office, pull up the system, find out what the price was, then come back out. Let me talk to my manager, hold on a second, right? So he avoids all that, but just taking a glance at the ticket and says, all right, you want it for, okay, yeah, I can do $999. Let's go to my office, let's do the paperwork, right? I thought it was ingenious. Just goes to show you, not everything has to be electronic, right? All right, so one of the major issues with the queries is you want to offload processing to the server as much as possible. Here you have this amazing tool, which is SQL Server, right, that runs circle around Access. Do you really want to run a query that's got 5 tables and multiple joins, inner, outer joins, left joins, and all this with function calls? It's just not going to work. Just not. You need to learn how to offload that processing to SQL Server, and we call SQL Server queries views. So you're going to learn how to create them. You're going to learn how to link them back into Access. Do you have to convert every query in Access to a view? No. For the most part, and SQL Server Migration System will create the views for you. I don't tell it to create any views. I just sparingly convert those queries that are slow to SQL Server. That's my preference. If you want to convert them all to views, the tool will help you with that. It will not always do that, because there's some function calls with some weird query syntax that can't help you upgrade to SQL Server. For the most part, it does a good job. But I tend to stay away from that. I don't upgrade any query at all. And as I'm working in the alpha version and I see complex queries, that's when I migrate them to SQL Server. We're going to be using AI in this course. We're going to leverage AI to the max in terms of using AI to convert the Access SQL to T-SQL. And you want to, if you want to kill performance real quick, link a SQL Server table with a local Access query. A local table, right? What would be a good instance of that? Well, let's say, for example, the list of states, right? You would normally not upload or create a table in SQL Server with the list of states, because it's only 50 records, right? With the territories, 55 records with all the territories, right? Every state in the union. We're not creating new states around here anytime soon, so it's a fairly static table. And so a rookie developer will look at this and say, I'm not going to upgrade SQL Server. I'm going to leave it local because that makes it faster for my drop downs, which it does. I do agree. You should have the local table of your states and your front end and use that for your drop downs. Why go back to the server for the list of tables? Why use a linked table, right, for states? So yes, leave it as a local table. But what I don't want you doing is using that state table in a query with a SQL Server table. Because anytime you do, and we call this hybrid queries, anytime you do that, now listen up, this is an important nugget. Every time you do that, you're going to kill the performance. Why? Because the old ABC driver, remember this, the old ABC driver? That's a layer between Access and SQL Server. This old ABC driver is a layer. And what that driver does an amazing job of converting your Access SQL syntax to T-SQL. That's the whole reason of the driver. The driver looks at your Access query and there's some commands in there that SQL Server does not recognize, but it converts them over to a format the server does recognize. So when the ODBC driver sees your query, your local table says, I don't see this table on the SQL Server. So SQL Server pushes the entire content of all the tables you have in your query to the Access frontend, and then tells Access you query and come up with the results. So that's another coffee break, and sometimes it even times out. Do not use hybrid queries. Instead, going back to the example of the 50 states, create a table on SQL Server with those 50 states so that when you do have a query, it'll process the query in SQL Server because there's a table of 50 states on the server and there's a table of 50 states in Access. And they're both being used for the situation that might come about, right? So do not use hybrid queries. It'll kill your performance. All right. So your homework, your mission for next month, November, you need to have all these things installed on your PC so you can follow along next month. You're gonna get the Developer Edition of SQL Server. All this stuff is free. You could use SQL Server Express, by the way. I recommend the Developer Edition, but the Developer Edition is the same as the Enterprise Edition, but only one person can access the database at one time. Install SQL Server Management Studio, which is short for SSMS, the SSMA, and then we're going to convert the Northwind Access database, which if George shows up next month, he's the one that actually is an expert in that database because he's part of the original team that I've recently upgraded. So we're going to be using the latest upgraded Northwind, and we would love for you to follow along the exercises. So get all this stuff installed, take a screenshot right now so you know, make sure you're ready for next month. And we're going to do this. All right, we're going to open up for questions. Let me see if I can unmute you guys. Let's see. All right. You guys liked our first session of SQL Server with Access Academy? All right, I got a thumbs up. Thank you. All right, we got a heart emoji. Thank you, Jan. Alphonse, you have a question? What is your question? I know you don't have a mic, so go ahead and type it in for me. Anybody, while waiting for Alphonse to type his question. All right, so which version? George, I want to use the one that's got the, I'm going to make a point with the one that's got the attachment field, the multi-value field. We're going to try to upgrade the old one so people can see how it fails, and then we'll use the other one. We can use the developer version if you.
Yeah, I think they both have attachment fields.
Perfect.
Yeah.
We'll talk about how to handle that.
Yeah.
So look, if you like this session, please comment and join me at the Access with SQL Server group. I'm going to go back to that slide with the link so you can join me here. Let me copy this link. Would love to have you as part of my group here on the web. So paste down the chat. Please join. You have to apply because we want to keep headhunters out of LinkedIn and people are spamming the group. And please put in a good word for me so that other people can leverage this. They can, if they missed part one, if you're watching this on YouTube, please join us the second week in November for part two. All right, don't forget to fix multi-entry fields. Yeah, we're gonna see if we can have that. I'm not sure I believe, George, you know, if does it have a multi-entry?
Developer does for sure. I think Starter does.
Perfect. So we're going to be handling those cases. How do we handle those fields before we migrate?
Yeah.
And then we're going to be leveraging AI. I mean, there is a ton of stuff since I last did this Academy one. If you are interested in becoming an AI expert, you're going to love this course because we're going to be leveraging AI to the hilt in next month and in November. All right, well, this has been Juan Soto, your host for Access SQL Server Academy. If you're watching on YouTube, where were you? We missed you. Would love to have you on our next version, our next live version where you can ask questions. And then we'd love to see you here in November, second week in November at 6:30 Central Standard Time. So long, everyone. Have a great rest of your month. Don't forget the homework. Come ready. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.